Good afternoon, everybody. First thing I do is apologize for my accent, but you will have to go through it now for 40 minutes. I'm coming from the neutral country of Switzerland that is observing everything else that's going on in Europe with a big smile. Yeah, so this is the hardcore, and you know, I almost feel bad because we talk about well-being and about employees and motivating and being healthy, and I speak about money. I speak about the relationship between talent and people who are committed to the organization, and also about the other side and saying, well, at the end of the day, the organization needs to make money. And how do we reconcile those two? And bringing it in the context of corporate culture. This was one of those things when you read the word toxic and destructive of an employee who put a blog on the web, and that blog created that company to lose 2.15 billion in less than 24 hours. Then you can conclude two things. Number one, news travel really fast today. That's one. The other one is, when you work in a company that is toxic and, as he says, destructive, that will create stress among the people who work in this company. So that's really the dark side, when things don't happen the way they are supposed to happen. And I found it really interesting. I looked things up on the web, and CIPD apparently is really one of those leading organizations that brings HR people together, and they have that statement of well-being, that definition. What I found really interesting is the second part of it, which says balancing the need of the employee and the organization. Now that's a completely different view a little bit, because oftentimes when we talk about well-being, depending what country you're in, it's very much employee focused. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we shouldn't be, but it's very much employee focused. In Germany, it's very heavily employee focused. And there's some very strong work councils that push that envelope very, very hard. But I think that definition is interesting, the second part. Also I found that picture on the web, and it separates culture from all the rest. And when you look at this, you say, well, culture is everything that's really explained there. Culture is the way things we do around here. We have really sophisticated definitions for culture, but we like the definition, culture is the things we do around here. Or even a better definition for culture is the things we do when we think nobody is watching. And those of you who have children know how that works. When the parents are in the room, everything is fine. You leave the room, war breaks out. It's a little bit on organizations. On the deficit statement, we say culture represents the worst behavior that you're ready to accept. So if you have a value that says respect, and what happens when a leader does not respect and creates an environment in which employees don't want to talk anymore, in which employees feel that they have to hold back because if they say something bad is going to happen, which has an impact on the well-being of employees. And I think the biggest enemy of well-being of employees is entitlement. When you're out there and you say, I expect you to do this for me, and if you don't, I'm not working for you. Here's a picture of one of my clients. This is the daycare center of that client. There's everything you could ever wish for in there. Everything. You can drop off your children at 6 o'clock in the morning and you can pick them up at 7 in the evening. It's a dream. The problem is when I visited, the CEO told me, I have employees who work here because we have the daycare center, not because they're committed to the organization. And now we have exactly, we have the bad side, the toxic and destructive, and here we have the thing which is, how much is too much? When you really need to have a little bit of turnover in your organization, but nobody's leaving, because you think, my God, I can never afford that. I can never bring my children into a room like this or in a building like this because we don't have the income. So, and then the other thing that's happening in the world is the context of the world is changing really quickly, which will have an impact of how we work and how we bring people in and how we deal with people and how do we promote people. And who has not heard that statement? Has everybody heard that statement? Right. What's wrong with it? Let me ask you, what's wrong with this statement? I give you a hint, it's a balance sheet statement, right? So if we say that employees are our most important asset, may I suggest that we must also say, and therefore they are our biggest liability. And we avoid that part because this is the unpleasant part. What happens if employees become a liability? What happens if they leave? What happens if you have high absenteeism? All those negative things, which are caused by something, I understand that. But, sometimes it's entitlement. Why don't we have this? Why don't we have that? When HR people say, HR must have a seat at the table. And I said, no, absolutely not. You earn it. And if you don't earn it, you don't have a seat at the table. So I find it interesting when we talk about, and I think well-being is part of this. Well-being is part of the liability thing, because if the work environment is not in the way it's supposed to be, it creates a liability with employees. So the problem of all that is pretty systemic. And the question we always have is, what does that really mean? So results are an outcome of process and people. You have both. You need to have really good processes in the organization, and you need to have the people who know how to operate within those processes. It's the downfall sometimes on the Lean Sigma companies to say process is everything. If we have a really good process, things will just work out. And they tend to forget that any process is always driven by employees. And we don't get the employees involved in the process don't work, and we have a problem. So results are an outcome of organization processes and the people side, which we call the employee life cycle process. And this is all influenced by external and internal factors. And we talk about work-life balance. What we really mean is work-leisure balance. Because work is part of life, isn't it? And it should be. But it's the leisure part that we struggle with sometimes. So it's becoming complex. And for leaders, that's a real problem. They sit there and they say, on one hand, I need to create an environment in which my employees can perform at the highest possible level. But I also need to do everything that my stakeholders, or the key stakeholders of the organization, are happy with the way I run this organization, which is a permanent tension. And in fact, these tension points are really strong. They work against each other. And now, we ask ourselves, well, what you really want from employees is discretionary performance. Not just performance, you want discretionary performance. Anybody who is honest enough and works in a corporation will say that. You want employees to go the extra mile. And employees go the extra mile if they feel that they're in an environment where it is worthwhile doing it. We call that commitment. I'm not calling it engagement, I'm calling it commitment. Commitment is different to engagement. And it's an interesting game you can play. You can ask yourself, say, okay, what if my employee is motivated and has the capability, but there is no opportunity to use that capability? What's going to happen? Do you need that? Do you get discretionary performance? Probably not. What if the employee is able and has opportunity but not motivated? Not giving this, you need all three of them all the time. And that's a balancing act. To say, well, and you know, we can even replace motivation with aspiration. It doesn't really matter. But you need all three at the same time. And that costs money. When we do organizational culture surveys, one of the statements we always find low in most organizations is our organization continuously invests into the capability of our employees. One of the lowest statements. Over 25 years, you know, we have researched and we have studies that tell this is the lowest rating. And then the same company says employees are our biggest asset. But they don't invest in the asset. And then you have asset turnover, which is negative. I don't know how many people, how many of you actually measure the hidden cost of turnover in the organization as part of the profit and loss statement. When I worked for Hertz, for the Hertz car rental company a long time, we have a frontline turnover of 78%. Just 78%. Every 14 months, theoretically, we have new staff in the locations. The cost of 78% turnover, nobody ever looked into that, was $64 million. $64 million of money went through the door, and nobody knew why. It's called budget overrun. You spend more money, you don't know why. What's causing it? And turnover cost, by the way, falls all the way through to adjusted pre-tax. There is nothing in between. Well, if you're a CEO of the organization, you say we need to get turnover down. You know, what is it cost? Because our employees don't like the job in which they, well, what's the reason for it? Why do people leave us? Why do we have so big, by the way, it's not high turnover. Big hotels sometimes have 100%. In retail, it's nothing unusual, but what's causing it? How do you get discretionary performance if you don't do all those three things? So here's things changing in the world. And we talk about the demographic and social values, which become really important for most employees. You say, what if you could measure that? And that's where it gets really interesting, because we're working with a model. And I've been on the other side, by the way. I've been a client to this organization, which I lead today, when I worked at Hertz and before. And we said, what is out there? Because when you talk to a CEO about culture, every CEO gets it. Said, I know. Culture is really important. Now, what's in it for me if I work on it? So this is how those people think. Nothing negative about the CFO. Say, yeah, I invest, but I want a return on my investment. And so we looked at different models in the marketplace, and there is lots of them, and there's good models in the marketplace. There's nothing wrong with it, but this was the only one we found that is actually connected to financial results. And I show you later what the connection is. And when you go around the model, you say, okay, look, every CEO, every leader in this world deals with two tensions. One is to balance internal and external influences. I have to do this all the time. Something happens external, I need to do it internally to react. If something happens internally, I need to see what is the impact externally. And on the other side, I need to bring flexibility to the organization, but I need to keep it stable, because the one thing employees don't like is permanent change in the organization. So we need to have some stability. And this brings the model. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but what is important about it is each of those indices that go around the model, goals and objectives, vision, agreement. You know, how do we work together? How do we resolve conflict? How do we make sure the handoffs between functions actually happen, especially matrix organizations? How do we make sure that employees get the capabilities they need? You look at all those, you go in all the documentation. I don't know, you should Google once well-being. There's about 750 million entries on well-being. You go out there and you pick the research data, and the research data says really what it's all about. When employees are committed to the organization, I go away from the word well-being, when employees are committed to the organization, these 12 factors really matter. And when you look underneath what that means, read CIPD, read Gallup, it doesn't matter who you read. There's wonderful research reports out there. That's what they say. That's theoretically easy to say. The question is, talk about meaningful values. I make one test with CEOs. I said, you have two high caliber sales directors. Both have a target of $1 million. Making these numbers up. Both of those directors meet the $1 million at the end of the year. Do you pay both of them the same bonus? Of course we do. Of course we do. I say, okay, now one of your sales directors has a staff turnover of 5%, the other sales director has a staff turnover of 35%. Do you still pay the same bonus? Yeah. Really? Because the latter contributes much less to the bottom line of the organization and makes about 35 or 30% of people more angry than the other one, is actually creating a problem. And if he is a bully and your value says respect, then you should actually fire that sales director because he's violating one of your main values. And then the story, yeah, no, we can't do that. Remember, I mean, listen, this man has relationships with clients. He knows them all. If he goes away, we lose all that income. I say, okay, then take the word respect off your values, or make sure it doesn't happen. Because if you respect the bullying of that sales director, you just send a message to the rest of the organization saying bullying people is okay. And you defeated your own values. That's when it's so easy to say these things, but to actually reinforce them in the organization becomes very difficult because you always find a reason why not to do it. I worked for Texas Instruments. Great company, president, great man, very soft-spoken, real gentleman, who said, guys, I want you to know, I hate public executions. Because in the US it's typical, you know, somebody gets fired publicly, everybody knows about it. Yeah, I hate public executions. But one every 5 years is a good thing. The challenge is to find the right person. And then we are not sending an email where we say, well, this person is unfortunately leaving us, and then there is 15 lines of praise, and you wonder why he is going. But he said, I want to tell the world why he is leaving. This man has violated fundamental values of our organization. He cannot be a member of our management team. Huge effect. Suddenly somebody said, oh, he is serious with values. Now, you know, you get a measure of this. That's what it looks like. I can't go in. And that suddenly tells you, where do I need to focus on? When you get those results. You get white space is opportunity. So whenever you see white space, you say, well, we have, you know, meaningful values where you get a value score which is pretty low among all the other scores, and you can act on it. So you can measure it. You can measure culture. It's possible. And when people say you cannot measure culture, it's not true. You can do it. And then, of course, culture relates to the employee life cycle. Employees go through life cycles. They join the company, they get introduced in the company, they hopefully get promoted, and so on and so on. And at one point, they may decide to leave. Well, one of the theories that we had in Texas Instruments at the time was, well, if employees leave us for a good reason, that's okay. And if we treat them well, they will talk well about us, and they will probably become our customer, depending where they go. So we make sure they have a positive experience in the employee life cycle. And when you look at the employee life cycle, it's all about really focus on the employees. Why do people join us? Do we have a compelling value proposition for the employee to say, we are the right company to work for? And be honest about it, not making it up. What motivates the candidate to come to us? Is the motivation right? Is he coming to us because we have a wonderful daycare center? Or is he coming to us, or she coming to us, because we are an attractive organization to work for? And you go around the circle. When you go around the circle, you say, well, we have to be ready for the employee to guide them through the whole process. If you talk about succession, so many people have succession plans, and when the key position becomes open, oftentimes we go outside and hire somebody else. So the employees say, why do we have a succession plan if we don't really bring people in from the inside? Oh, we need new blood. Okay, always find an argument. And when you think about life cycle management, one of the questions that I would like to ask yourself, especially when you bring people in. Before I ask that question, I talk about this. And this is now we're coming into the measurement part, where we say, in fact, if you want to measure the impact of what you do for your employees and with your employees, you have to decide that before you actually start the program. And what I mean with deciding is which of your financial indicator is impacted by what you do with your employees. You have business processes and you have people processes. And they intersect invariably at one point in time. I have no clue how much time I'm already talking here, and I don't want to go over time. But the one thing that I have always, that we have studied at one point when I worked in the airline business is, does anybody work in the airline business here? Nobody? Well, I can ask you the question, what's the worst job in an airline? Which job do you don't want to have in an airline? And you're courageous enough to say what it is? Pilot. Yeah. So well paid, huh? They fly a lot, they're not often at home.
Say that again? I said lost baggage.
Lost baggage. Lost baggage. You wonder why those people get up. Everybody who goes into, everybody who goes into the lost luggage agent, is angry. Nobody goes in there and says, yes, I lost my luggage. Doesn't happen. And my theory was that people who work at lost luggage, they also at home have a dungeon. It cannot be. I mean, why do you get up and say, let's have coffee, and then I go to the office and we're beaten up all the day? And we studied. We went to Lufthansa. Lufthansa at one point was the benchmark for lost luggage agents. It was incredible. People got angry and came out and were happy they lost their luggage. They said, well, how do you do that? And we looked at those employees, and they had all one trait in common. All one trait in common. What do you think that was? It was altruism. They all scored high in altruism. They said, well, of course they're angry, they lost their luggage. They're not, we understand, we're here to help. We feel good doing that. This is sort of thing when the rubber hits the road, when you say, how well does people fit into a job? How motivated are they to take this job? And how do you sustain that they stay committed in doing? I saw that they had 90% turnover. I said nobody stays in those jobs longer than a year. They had a turnover of 18%. Now, for me, things came together and said, okay, if we treat those people correctly, if they get the right training, if we keep them at the sharp end of the education, if whatever it might be, if we pay them correctly, if they get rewards for good behavior with the clients, if they align with the client, it all makes sense. It comes together. I don't care about happy employees. I care about motivated employees, because employees are motivated and committed to the organization will be happy. Working on happiness for me is working on an effect, and I can't work on effects. I have to work on the causes. And what's causing happiness for an employee? That's always the question. So the intersect, and for me this is the really, and I'm really, maybe you feel that, I'm really passionate about this. The intersect between business process and people process is so oftentimes completely ignored. Completely ignored. Where do I, as an employee, impact a business process? That is the real question. And if I do the right things at that intersect, I will have a good effect, and I actually can say, well, it's sort of a reverse engineering process where I look at cause and effect relationships in processes and link them back to the strategic intent that the company has and make sure that it's backed by the financial plan. When I worked at Hertz, we actually added the line of undesired turnover in our P&L. And the business managers had to forecast of how many people they think they're going to lose, which they did not want to lose, in order to capture the hidden cost and put the hidden cost in the financial plan, and not to have a problem at the end of the year because we run over the budget. And the wonderful thing is it all sounds cold and it has to do with money, but we never had such a high employee satisfaction than we had when we started the process. Because employees said at least there is an objective measure and not the measure of somebody who thought X by gut feeling.
You have 12 minutes.
Sorry?
You have 12 minutes.
12 minutes. Oh my God. And so, the question that I was talking about, reflect on it for just a minute. In the first arrow here, which position in your organization creates the highest impact? It's a really difficult question to answer. Which position in your organization is creating a high impact? And what I mean with impact, adding value to the financial results. It was very interesting. I stayed with the Hertz example. In Hertz, the CEO, who was the ultimate alpha male, was groomed by Jack Welch. He came in an organization that was left alone for many years, owned by Ford. Ford didn't care. Headquarter Park Ridge, New Jersey, 45 minutes away from Union Square in New York, in the middle of a park. Wonderful place to work. Left alone for 27 years. After 27 years, private equity takes over. And you know what that means? And the chairman of the private equity is Jack Welch, who puts one of his GE guys in charge. Perfect storm for people who were left alone for 27 years. But he said one thing: I do not care about anybody working headquarters. What I really care about is people working at the station. Because these are the people who have the most significant jobs and who create most value to our organization. If they don't work well, you headquarter people don't even have a salary. It was pretty brutal thinking, but it was absolutely correct. Because in car rental, if you don't like yellow, tomorrow you rent red or green or blue. Cost of switching in car rental is zero. Absolute zero. And customer turnover in car rental is about 82%. The good news is it's 82% for everybody. And people come back because say, well, red is also as bad as yellow, might as well stay by yellow. We know what that really means. And our customer satisfaction for NPS, Net Promoter Score, at Hertz was 31%. Pretty low, even for retail. After 5 years of transforming the culture, working on the way the offices were built, I mean, I'm talking remote location, the way people were hired, the way people were treated, the whole redesign of the brand. The Net Promoter Score for Hertz in 3 years went from mid-30s to upper 60s. When I left, it was 69%, which is unheard of in retail. Turnover, I said, was 78%, dropped down to 27%. These are hard numbers that you can't dispute. The financial contribution after 4 years, vetted by finance, was a financial impact over 4 years of $147 million. These are undisputable numbers. Now, is it easy? No, it's not. It's relatively easy to talk about in 40 minutes. But when you are in it, it's pretty difficult. But it was because we had a measure. These are measures that were applied by that retail company of how they at each step decided that these financial indicators really matter, and we're going to measure them on a monthly basis. And here's one part of the research data that we have. So the model I mentioned is a model that has evolved over research over 27 years, and companies have been tracked. And we have a database of about 1,047 companies who have gone through the survey that are entitled to go through into the benchmark. And what we found is that the top 30 companies of that part that we're talking about have an EBITDA growth of, in fact, they destroy EBITDA and they destroy sales. So these are companies that are declining in reality, versus those with a profile on the right where EBITDA growth was 17%. We have one client in the UK that we can name because we published this company. The name is Dreams. I don't know if you know what Dreams were, that company, right? About 5 years ago, they had an EBITDA of minus 4.7 million. And they started this initiative. Last year, they had an EBITDA of plus 47 million. In 3 years. We wrote a case study and we published articles. This is significant when you go from almost minus 5 million to plus 47 million in 3 years. Was it easy? No, but they had to completely transform their way of working. They had to transform the way they hired people. They had to transform the way they built their stores and configured their stores. The total infrastructure got changed. It pays off. But what is much more important, the link to finance exists. It makes me itchy when I hear people say, yeah, well, you can't really, that doesn't work. Culture, no, you can't measure it. Or you can't measure it because you don't want to measure it. And oftentimes when we talk to CEOs and we talk about culture change, it's actually fear that keeps them from doing it. And those who were perfectly honest always said,
I think I know what's going to look like, and I'm not sure I want to have it on paper. And so what? And continue what you do because you're doing it extremely well. But the connection is there. And that's how you bring it together. I said results are the outcome of process and people. And on the people side, it's really about real organization excellence. What are you doing here in building a climate of trust? Accountability. I hate the word empowerment. I don't know what it means. People love to be empowered, but they don't like the accountability that goes with it. And so, saying, you can do this, but I hold you responsible for what you do. You cannot have both of it. You cannot have the freedom to act, but not be being held accountable for your actions. That doesn't mean you get fired the first time something goes bad, but we don't want you to make mistakes again. And in fact, people like to be accountable. And those who don't, that's fine. They get a different job where accountability is much less often. And I really want to close this presentation with what I call inspirational leadership. And I put a statement down here, and then if you read it by a gentleman called Ted Haggerty, who used to be the president of Texas Instruments, president and CEO of Texas Instruments. He made the following statement. It's one of the most powerful statements I've ever seen from a CEO, which attracted me to work for this company. What is amazing about it, look at the year when the statement was made. I claim at this time you didn't need to work, you didn't need to worry about employee well-being because there were so many jobs out there. You left the company and you found a new job in Nova. And he lived there. I worked for this company for 15 years. That was a true value. Insensitive leadership. You weren't insensitive leader, you were gone. You had no respect for employees, you were gone. There was no compromise. And I think this is what we miss today. We talk about things, we talk about values, we talk about culture, but when push comes to shove, we don't do the thing we need to do at the latest consequence because, remember, your culture is the worst behavior that leaders are prepared to accept. And we fall into that trap so many times. Thank you very much for your attention.